Hello, and welcome to Consciousness Coaching Level 1. This class is about fire, the element of the third chakra, which dictates our self-worth, and it's linked to the process of individuation, which begins in the third chakra, leaving home, and is the step that leads us to belief change and transmutation. Beyonce says, your self-worth is determined by you. You don't have to depend on someone to tell you who you are. Well, it takes a lot to get here. Let's put it that way. She's right, but there's a lot of undoing or accepting or owning that has to happen before you get to this space. So I just want to ponder the astrology wheel for a moment. Even if you don't know astrology, you can imagine a pie with 12 pieces. The first 4 pieces are your story. Those you inherit at conception. So you get your body, your thoughts, your emotion, and your level of consciousness. That is all having to travel with you as you move into the 5th house that begins the journey of discovery of oneself and the individuation process. So imagine trying to drag the exact thing that you feel makes you broken. Imagine trying to drag the exact thing you think limits your potential. Imagine trying to drag the exact desires or judgments or low-level consciousness that you're trying to raise. It's difficult. It puts us in a conundrum. So in a previous class, I talked about the honey pot and being covered in honey. And we're going to revisit that metaphor today. So imagine moving forward into the 5th house or your next step or your new circle, your transmutation, your individuation, your adult, your spiritual adult, but still having remnants of that honey dripping on you. It's difficult to reconcile. So it's true, nobody can tell you who you are or has the right to, and you don't have to wait for that. But there are a lot of factors that are woven into the story that were predetermined, let's say, even though we're ultimately responsible for picking our parents in the story, that we keep taking with us. So it doesn't go away. It's not something that we let go of. It's that we move forward despite it. So here's an image of a woman dripping in honey so that you have that metaphor, those first 4 houses of astrology. You've gotten your thoughts that, of course, are low limiting like honey. You have your emotions, you have your desires body, and you have a low level consciousness. And if the point is to raise consciousness from the moment of conception and leave some of it behind, not all of it, you need your low level consciousness at times. Clients oftentimes think that they have to always show up as adult. It's 2080 in this model. They oftentimes think that they have to turn the other cheek, be the higher person. And this isn't true. I have a saying I say to clients, which is, you can't show up to a sword fight with a butter knife. And we often have to fight fire with fire. And this is okay. It's recognizing when a low consciousness level serves us, when we need to show up as a human earthly being fighting for custody or fighting for alimony or fighting for our job or our relationship. And when it's appropriate to turn the other cheek. And the reality is that with every fight, we can still do higher level work, because if we come back to self, do the TED Talk, identify why we created it and what it's mirroring in us that we're doing to ourselves, then it's a win-win. We can honor the honeypot, the low level consciousness, and we can raise consciousness. And this is what I mean by say, think, do. I'll tell clients, get a spiritual STD, say, think, and do. You have to, within yourself, what you say, so your rule book, your value system, is how you show up in the world doing, And thinking is that you've transmuted and you actually believe that that's your value system, those are your rules, and that's your new level consciousness. So they go together, but it is an interesting space because similar to every earthly consciousness story, sort of informing the spiritual consciousness story, we have a similar thing here. How do we stay in high consciousness in our new belief and yet address the low consciousness that we chose upon conception? The reality is that as you transmute, as you choose yourself more, as you live with your new belief system, transmuting, saying, thinking, and doing, that lower level consciousness shows up a bit less and less and less, and your new consciousness level and the issues associated with that, because all consciousness is low consciousness ultimately, it's just raising it one octave from your birth or your conception, I'm sorry, that will bring another set of things. It'll seem life-changing because it is life-changing. Your entire perspective has changed, but it still has issues, and you'll still have to metaphorically go home for Thanksgiving, but you'll be able to handle it differently. So it's important to talk about the ego, the personality, and the soul. The third chakra is called the Manipura chakra, and it houses our fire. Fire is the only element that humans are in control of. This is super important to reiterate. You get your air, your thought at conception. You get your water in the emotional state during pregnancy. You get your earth in your body. The only element you are in control of is fire. How much fire, how little fire, or just right. So we have to talk about where fire, we use our fire in our life to understand how to use it wisely. At the moment of conception, and of course through your 0 to 7, your snow globe shattered and you felt separate from another person. This is necessary. You needed boundaries. This separation, however, created your ego. This creates your drive. This creates your fear. This creates you to have courage, to move in the world, to want to succeed, to get your validation needs met, to get the corner office. So this is a drive in our life that we have. We will never not have an ego. Next is the personality. The personality is linked to the ego. It's the mask that you put on to have that ego driven. So perhaps you're a class clown, perhaps you're the teacher's pet, perhaps you're the one in the office that brings the coffee, or perhaps you're the nice guy. So any of the masks that you wear and the ego work together. They are an attempt to get your needs met elsewhere and to confirm you're not enough. Whenever the ego and the personality are in control, you are in child, you're seeking others to meet your needs. So for instance, one of the things I tell clients is when you admire someone, think of what wound they're trying to cover that created that ego or that personality. In my case, validation. I grew up in a home where education was valued. Everyone was in higher education. The cult leader had hundreds of diplomas on her wall. So if I personally didn't get hundreds of diplomas, then I would not be of worth and I would feel separate from the entire tribe. So it was meeting a need. Now, when I study or take a class or learn something, I'm doing it for myself. It's a different space. The ego or the wound in the personality, the mask, the teacher mask, is still there. But now the soul is directing the energy, the fire within. The soul is directed. It's directed will, directed purpose. It gives you the direction in which your soul came in this life to live out. You must confront your ego and your personality, hence the purpose of the TED Talk. When you do the TED Talk, if the number is very high, an 8, 9, or 10, the person is living their fire wrapped up in their ego and their personality and not their soul. It's usually from a place of fear, the sympathetic nervous system of fight or flight. And they can get into illnesses like fatigue. When a person is working from the soul, the ego and the personality are still there, but the conflict tends to be less, so that the rest of the fire, the initial fire tied up in the conflict, is still to associate it with fear, perhaps ego, personality. But there's enough left over, let's say 5, 6, or 7, that the soul can kick in. And the person, despite their fear, despite they're wanting to shut down, despite having made mistakes in the past, besides having validation needs or protection needs in their ego and personality, they can still move forward with the soul. So there are 2 tenets that I want to really talk about. You are afraid of your fire, and you are afraid of the darkness of your power. How do we reconcile these 2 things? So it would take you back to the 3rd chakra, which is the center of our fire element. We have, let's say, a 10. That would be the epitome, you would think, of self-worth, all of the fire allotted to you. This is called Agni. Agni is the god of fire and is linked to your digestive fire. In Ayurveda, we can tell a lot about the person's headspace by what's going on in their gut and how their digestion works. Is it too much? Is it too little? Is it stagnant? Is it slow? So we are all afraid of our fire. It is the reason we create conflict. It is the reason we do the TED Talk. The TED Talk reminds us that we're scared, that we're children, and that we want a boundary. We do not know how to put a boundary on ourselves. Hence, you're afraid of the darkness of your power because of your Hydra heads. For instance, mine is pride. I don't know yet when to be prideful, when to be humble. I haven't figured out that quality just yet in a 48 to 52. So situations that I create, I get tied up my fire. And if they're at 8 or 9 or 10, then I'm really afraid that I don't know how to be humble. And if they're lower level conflict, then that means I'm not as afraid and I can actually move in the world with some pride because I trust the boundary I've set for myself. This is the importance of the rule book. When we have rules about how we're going to behave in what situations and with whom, then we don't have to be afraid of our power anymore. We don't have to be afraid of the darkness of our sloth, of our gluttony, of our lust, of our pride. So the conflict number in the TED Talk tells you how afraid the client is. They're afraid of moving forward in the world, oftentimes because they've made that same mistake and they burn the house down metaphorically. Or they're so afraid because they don't know how to set a limit or a boundary to their darkness of their power. So we have to help them juggle both. This comes back to basic parenting in the earthly world. If your parents were very, very strict and they set way too many boundaries, you may be very fearful and not know how to move in the world with courage. If your parents were more permissive and they let you do whatever, and you might have had a really bad party or literally burned the house down or made really bad mistakes, then you might be afraid of the darkness of that fire, the darkness of that power, because no one ever taught you limits. So a child, and hence the TED Talk and the child mode, is to save ourselves, is to help ourselves, is to set a boundary, to say, mom and dad gave me a boundary. Let me do exactly what they said. Then I won't steer wrong. This is all very subconscious. That is one of the major functions of staying in child mode. When we choose to go in teenager, like teens do, they make bad choices. They slip a little. Maybe they do too much drugs or get too drunk or make a bad choice in the bedroom. And that is the exact same thing we're helping clients with, trying to transition so that they could get to a solid rule book of what they want their life to look like, so that they have parameters and boundaries that they have determined because of their value system, so that they know how to move in the world. So the body is a container of the fire. A lot of people, and you may encounter this in your practice, will come to you with physical issues. Physical issues, physical illness has to do with one of two things. I'm afraid to have my fire contained, so therefore, let me break down the container that houses the fire. I want to be all knowing, all being, all pride all the time. So those bad bucket values with no limits, you don't necessarily know this consciously, but the illness is proof of that. The other thing that this does is it shows the narcissism. It shows the narcissism that we do not need the body to house the container, to house the fire. And so we can break it down. What happens is, you see in this image, this is the third chakra, the Agni, the center of the fire. Fire is also found in the eyes. We waste our digestive fire, our Manipura chakra, our crown, our jewels, our throne, by wasting it through the eyes of illusion. When we're lustful for something that someone else has, when we're gluttonous for something else, when we're prideful, when we're envious, we lose fire through the deadly sins or vices, the judgments that we'll see in the TED Talk in step 2. So what the client is saying with their conflict number of 8 or 9 is that, let's say the judgment is laziness, that they're not hardworking enough. So let me tie up the fear, the fire, in the judgment around laziness. Therefore, I cannot move in the world and prove I am lazy. So it's kind of a counterintuitive process, but this is the trick of the subconscious and the psychological musical chairs. That's why that second question is so powerful. But it is wasted through one of the sins. Most of them come through the eyes, and then it robs us of our fire, of our self-worth. So it's not that anyone else tells you, it's just that you're seeing things in another person that you want for yourself. Whatever you admire in another person is something you have the capacity to be yourself. But instead, we wrap up the fire by lusting or envying, and then we rob ourselves of our power. And again, it's an attempt to reduce the fire because we're afraid of our fire. So Hestia, she is the goddess of the agora. In the Greek agora, think of the big marketplace. There were a bunch of different cults and rituals and ceremonies going on all the time. Hestia was in charge of the hearth or the fires. She could not leave the agora no matter what. She had to man her fires. This is a metaphor I use with clients. Man your fires. Do not get off your throne. Do not give your fire or your power away. 48 to 52% of the time are for you, your time, your money, and your resources. The other 48 to 52 is for another person. But if you man your fires, your third chakra will be strong. You will have self-worth, and you'll have enough fire to transmute. Fire is the only element humans are in charge of. Fire is the only element in which we can transmute behaviors to beliefs, or low consciousness beliefs to higher consciousness beliefs. So man your fires. How do you man your fires? Well, in this model, you man your fires by being self. Selfish is when you take someone else's power away, or you give away your own power. You're not manning your fires. Selfless doesn't exist. So self is the way to man your fires. Meet your own needs. Love yourself. Don't give away your power. And when you love yourself and meet your own needs, then you don't need to take another person's power away. And it's a win-win. They get to man their fires and you get to man yours. This is going to strengthen your self-worth. This is going to increase your chances of raising consciousness and transmuting. And this is going to strengthen your inner fire, where even though you'll have some fear, the conflict number will be less and you'll have more courage to move forward in the world, despite the honey, despite the low consciousness, despite the bodily desires, despite the sins, despite the impure thoughts. That's the way to move forward, even though you're covered with honey, is to man your fires. Thank you.